I'm Jim McKenna from Facilis Technology. This is why you're still not prepared for 4K shared projects. I think the next one will be, maybe same idea, but you're still not prepared for 4K shared projects, and that'll be maybe in a few months. And alternate title might be How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love 4K. So start off with a joke and always loosen things up. We're Facilis Technology. We've been around since 2004. We've been building shared storage systems for the entire time, really based on post-production editorial, boutique post-production to be specific, as well as many of the other verticals that we service. But boutique is especially important because high requirements for bandwidth, high requirements for compatibility across multiple operating systems and applications and things like that. So let me get right into sort of why we're here in the first place. And that reason is the ever-increasing raster that we're dealing with, from SD, the little postage stamp as we know it today, all the way up through HD, which is that nice 16:9 image that most are still viewing at home. 2K, a nice way to get back to that 4:3 aspect ratio. Then full-on UHD and 4K and full-frame 4K. So you see how that transfer of file sizes and frame sizes has really increased over the past few years, and that's come along with very high bandwidth requirements for all these different formats. 4K, that big 1200 megabytes per second that we hear about, that's full frame 4K 10-bit at 24 FPS each frame. Almost 50 megabytes in size. And so that's what we shoot for at the high end, because if we got that covered, then we can handle the rest of the standard 24p and most of the 30i stuff as well, even down into the compressed resolution. Now compressed, 210 megabytes per second for that ProRes 4K. We're still on the edge of being able to do that on some shared systems, and we like to say that we are one of the fastest out there when it comes to 4K and our ability to support it. But we're not just talking about 4K here. We're talking about things beyond 4K, which is 8K, or if you don't think 8K is going to be around, then we have some other ways of increasing data rates and increasing file sizes and their high frame rate, dynamic range. And these things are going to increase your data no matter what. So if you're sort of looking at this today as a way for someone to give you an easy way out, there's no real easy way out. What I'm going to do is try and help us get our heads around exactly what you should be investing in, how to get the best use and the best efficiency out of the systems that you have, because there's a lot of ways to spend a lot of money out there, and lots of people will be happy to take that, but can you really justify it based on the real 4K projects you're getting today, and the ways that you may be able to manage those 4K projects without going to full uncompressed and DPX workflows? Can you really justify the cost of that sort of uber SAN, that overarching umbrella of storage that other facilities may have invested in? Well, so you can just buy some small fast local storage, or maybe if you don't have a SAN yet for your 4K, just buy a small SSD SAN, very small capacity, no problem, right? Well, the problem is that the formats that require the highest throughput also are the largest, and they're going to require a lot of capacity as well. So you got to put it somewhere. It's not a matter of just having speed. You have to have size as well. So it is speed versus size. In many cases, you can't have both on a budget. So where do you go from here? And where most people look to, and where a lot of storage manufacturers are pointing you, is SSD versus hard disks. Spinning hard disk, very high capacity, 8 terabytes plus today in a single hard disk, versus up to 2 terabytes in an SSD. For a much higher cost, of course. SSDs are not the same cost per gig as a hard drive, several times more. So given that, let's talk about a little bit more in the workflow, because it's not as easy as just saying, I'm going to throw SSDs at this, or I'm going to throw hard drives at this. We have to talk about how to manage it in a workflow environment. So I have ingest, and this is a very simplified workflow, and not many people will subscribe to this completely, but it's a very generalized way of looking at perhaps a start to finish workflow in a post facility. Ingest, maybe you're transcoding, maybe not. Editorial, conform, finish, deliver. You know, back to the old days of standard def, uncompressed standard def, HD, uncompressed HD, before all the nice codecs came along. You know, most people were doing this offline online workflow, this compressed to uncompressed, this finishing conform phase. We're seeing it now again with 4K, proxying down to HD, compressed HD resolutions. But really, the only place you need very high bandwidth that can be achieved through SSDs today is in the finishing phase. So really, when it comes down to it, the ingest, transcode, edit, conform, and part of the conform and deliver is really based on high capacity long-term storage and not high bandwidth short-term storage. So we can sort of chunk these out in different ways and say, okay, well, I know I can't go for the Uber SAN, which is going to give me, you know, full bandwidth all the time to all my clients and just take up an entire wall of my machine room. But I know that there's a section of my timeline here, of my workflow, of my process that does require the higher bandwidth capability, in which case I have SSD and hard drive. So I'm happy, I'll just buy a little bit of each, right? Well, it's not quite that simple, because not only files need space, but time needs space. And you got to think about how these different elements of the workflow and their timing, their temporal range in your workflow are going to affect the space that you need on your system. So once again, we take this very simple workflow of post, as it may or may not exist in your facility, but a little overview just to get our heads around it. Ingesting the masters, transcoding, proxying to a secondary location, perhaps on the same hard drive set, editing that, still on that same hard drive set, copying data. Now, one thing you can't be afraid of is data movement and data copy between hard drives and SSDs, because it can happen so quickly these days. And in a well-architected system, when you're copying a gigabyte per second, you know, a copy process isn't that intensive and that time-consuming. So with those two elements in place, we can now conform and finish, and you can just export and conform right back to that hard drive for delivery, and you can be done. And in the reality of this, you're talking about a very small period of time where those SSDs are required. You may say to yourself, well, it doesn't matter, I still need the same capacity because those masters are very large. Well, that's true. And you may have several jobs running at the same time, and you may say, well, how do I manage that? There's certainly a way to do it where the SSDs, or the very high performance area or drive group of the storage, is utilized in such a way as to be in a temporal way using less storage than everything else. So you could be using the SSDs for multiple jobs in sequence and not have to worry about having overlapping jobs or having data exist on the SSD drives, flash drives, at the same time across multiple jobs. And this is the way you will achieve a smaller capacity of high bandwidth storage versus a large capacity of the still fast but not quite as fast storage on hard disk drives, and enable you to sort of pick and choose what portion of your storage needs to be high bandwidth and what portion does not. Of course, the architecture of the system needs to be consistent with this, and it needs to be set up in such a way that you can make best use of it. And who does that? We're Facilis Technology. We make shared storage solutions for collaborative media production networks, and we've come up with a way. And you know, it's not going to be big news to many people that the offline online conform and finish workflow is back in force again in 4K. That's not big news, but it is big news to think about a system that can allow you to do both at any given time of the production workflow without impacting other processes within the same infrastructure or the same facility. Now, on to the options that we offer. The TerraBlock comes in multiple capacities, multiple types of drive sets, both hard drives and SSDs and combinations of both. We have software that manage the workflow, the volume workflow, and the data tracking workflow in the facility. Let's start off with really quick, how we first connect to the system. Now, if you're working in sort of an Ethernet environment today, where you're gigabit connected and you can go, maybe up to a very limited, highly compressed 4K or simple compressed HD flows, that's fine. We can support all those, and all those platform, these workstations will connect over gigabit natively without any extra settings or even a switch if you'd like. We go from there to increasing the bandwidth available to each individual workstation based on Thunderbolt, based on HBAs and PCIe cards, and those things will be, of course, various depending on the requirement of that particular job and the workstation. We then scale out to a couple new options, which is 32 gig Fibre Channel, which I'll be talking about in a moment, as well as our 40 gig Ethernet, which is a great switch interconnect. Allows us to go to a 10 gig switch, very high speed, and disseminate a lot of data streams among a lot of clients very easily. But before we get into much more of the bandwidth stuff, let's talk about how to manage the facility workflow by the use of virtual volumes. And virtual volumes is something that we've become very known for, and we've had a lot of penetration in post-production boutique editorial because of the fact that we make it so easy for you to create spaces for everybody and permission them very easily across multiple rooms, and the fact that they're very fast. So you don't have to worry about who may be using what format or what bandwidth or what requirement in each room, because you have a very high ceiling for the facility as a whole. Now, you may be dealing with a couple shows here that are taking up a couple rooms at a time. You may be dealing with documentary long-term, dealing with some social media type of shows, and you may have a tech ops drive, which is just required for your transcoding and whatever else is going on as a service in the technical operations of the facility, as well as perhaps a library and our archive volume that are spread throughout all of the rooms for their use and their library, maybe your stock footage library, your sound effects library, things like that. So very simply, you see how virtual volumes can accommodate a lot of different projects in the facility, and these are all extremely easy to create, and they're also very extremely easy to permission, because I can have multiple editors, of course, working on the same virtual volume at the same time with right permission. I can have that same volume locked off to read-only for producers and browsers that just need access to the volume for approvals and such. Library volumes can be locked off to everyone except the engineering crew or the post supervisor. Archive volumes can be disseminated, as well as the tech ops volume. So permissions are very simple. I can do read-only or writable across the entire facility. Some facilities have a very large work volume that encompasses all of the projects and spans across 15 or 20 users, and that's fine too. So virtual volumes give you that type of flexibility. They also give you a way to manage the media at a low level, because once again, this very generic workflow starts off with ingest, goes into the editorial phase, maybe goes to the finishing phase, and it's growing the entire time. That virtual volume is able to expand to fit whatever requirements the project has, and then perhaps even shrink back down again once it's time to run some revisions and output the show, until finally you go to the archive and upload stage. Yeah, that project being on a single volume enables all those stages to happen, especially the archive stage, without any need to sort and sift through a lot of diverse directory structures across a Bitbucket approach and a larger SAN investment, or environment rather, by use of virtual volumes, and also makes it very easy to track the client resources this way as well. So if I have access to all the job codes, all the sizes of the volumes, and I can export that on a weekly, daily basis, I always know what's going on. And something that's extremely important when you get down into the nuts and bolts of the system for 4K and for sequential file access especially, that's the block level virtualization. That's the ability for the system to manage data writes on the system in a pseudo-random pattern, to get away from that writing process from the external to the internal portion of the disk, we flatten out the performance curve in this way and give you the best performance all the way across the capacity of the system to 100%, and not have to worry about that drop off at 75 or 80%, where most every other SAN system and most every other hard drive will start to decrease in performance. So on top of the 20% more usable space that's there, which in the case of our largest system, 192 terabytes, which is about 160 terabytes usable and protected when all the volumes are created and being used, 20% of that, that's 32 terabytes. And so that's a huge amount of space to lose to a issue that most every hard drive has, unless you can do something at the low end, the block level of the system, that gives you that space back and allows you to keep working, even if the capacity starts to reach 90+%. Now, this is something that's very important to our 4K compatible and 4K requiring customers, as well as our shared file system, and the difference between that and single user write. There's a lot of Fibre Channel still out there, Fibre Channel 4 and 8 gig and 16, and we're going to be talking about 32 gig in a moment. And that Fibre Channel has some additional uses with TerraBlock. It has the ability to run our shared file system like Ethernet, very high speed. All of our stream counts are based on the shared file system, but we still have the access of block level device and SCSI protocol over Fibre Channel, which gives us a huge amount of bandwidth, saturates anything. We can actually saturate a 32 gig Fibre Channel system as well. And that gives you all the future proofing that you really need when it comes to how am I going to be able to perform at 4K high dynamic range into the future, or if it happens to be 8K, what am I going to do about that? Is that going to be 3 or 4 times the size of my preferred compressed resolution right now for 4K? In which case you're talking about a very high number, a very high level of requirements for bandwidth, and a need for a much more robust connectivity method and sharing method, perhaps with that same form factor that you have today. So that's what our single user write, our SCSI protocol over Fibre Channel is for. It is for bypassing the management layer when it becomes absolutely necessary to get the most bandwidth possible out of the system that no management layer could actually give you, because of the fact that it is managing a multi-user write file system. So the benefit of this is seen especially in 32 gig Fibre Channel range, because we're using the ATTO 32 gig Fibre Channel. They've announced it already. We've announced it for NAB that will be showing this technology. And for extremely high data rates, over 3 gigabytes per second to a single client and single user write, there's really no comparison to what 32 gig Fibre Channel can do for you. And it's extremely simple. A single cable between the server and the client gives you a direct connect 32 gig Fibre Channel. There is no more configuration to be done. You create, mount the volume, and you're off and running at extremely high speeds. And this is something that we're going to see adopted more. We do a lot of 16 gig Fibre Channel today. We do a lot of 16 gig Fibre Channel on clients that will never even utilize half of what 16 gig Fibre Channel can do. 32 gig gets us into a different range altogether. It gets us into that over 2 gigabytes per second, up to 3 gigabytes per second range. And it's going to be something that's going to change things for how you think about bandwidth in relation to shared storage systems, and not only the territory of local attached storage. Something else we're doing that we're showing at NAB this year is 12 gig SAS controllers. So internal to the server itself, we can generate over 3 gigabytes per second, and that's across multi-user write. So you want to stay in multi-user write mode. You want to have everyone have access to the same writable volumes across Ethernet and Fibre Channel. Go for it up to and over 3 gigabytes per second across multiple clients. And this is something that is relegated to very high-end server models, and it's a future technology for us. We're not shipping this yet, but this shows you the path forward to getting that much more out of the SAN than we ever have before. And that is actual numbers that you're seeing from clients to server talking over a management layer and shared file system, not just a internal benchmark. Now, let's get into what we sell. The TerraBlock systems come in a range of models, and as you can see, over the past few months, we have increased our capacity up to 192 terabytes for a 5U enclosure. And you see that we start at the low end at an 8D 32 terabyte system, still a relatively fast system, faster than ISIS 1000, and will allow you some decent 4K compressed workload. Moving on up through the EX models, we have expandable models through 12 and 16 drive to a 24D, which is 24 drive enclosure, up to 192 terabytes in capacity. Once again, about 160, 161 terabytes usable and protected, all of which is accessible up to 100% with full bandwidth. SSD 8 is our 2U SSD-based system, and we're going to talk about how we can incorporate that for your architecture to support your 4K workload, and also the Hybrid 24. And Hybrid 24 is our flagship model. It is a SSD and hard drive system, and that is the system that all of that big introduction in to talk about how you combine SSDs and hard drives in the same solution and make it work for you in a 4K world, that's really what we're talking about. So the Hybrid 24 is a virtual volume SSD and hard drive hybrid. As you can see, the old flagship, the 24D, had a great bandwidth profile. I mean, we were known for the amount of speed we can get from 24 drives, but the Hybrid 24 just surpasses it to such a great degree and maintains a much higher bandwidth as you go into the larger stream counts because SSDs are more tolerant to randomization. So for example, 11 streams of uncompressed HD, ProRes 4K, ProRes HQ 4K, that's the 444, that's going to be at 24 streams. That example of the multi-user write work group. So I'm in shared file system multi-user write. I can be performing on the SSD group that single stream of 4K DPX at 800 megabytes per second UHD, while still maintaining the entire stream count of the remainder of my facility. All those rooms that you saw on that that chart with the facility, all those are still going, and I can be performing that UHD 4K DPX in my Resolve or whatever color grading system I'd like at the same time. So this is the idea behind having a small SSD group, that group only being accessed when it comes time for the finishing work to happen, and then that volume being deleted and put away, knowing that all of those files still exist on the hard drive storage, which can be up to 128 terabytes of hard drive storage still in that 5U enclosure alongside the SSDs. Now, if I need to be doing something a little bit more than that, I simply go to a single user write workflow. 16 gig Fibre Channel, 2 clients, can be playing back UHD at the same time, and once again, still maintaining the entire stream count for the workflow, which is about double what you'd get from an ISIS 5500 just on that 16 drive group of hard drives within the TerraBlock Hybrid 24. Now the SSD 8 is a nice way to sort of hybridize, if that's a word, your environment with an SSD box that can be placed alongside your hard drive based 24D or 24EX model. With 8 and 16 terabytes in capacities, we use enterprise SSDs on all of our systems. Very important to talk to someone who knows about SSDs before you invest in SSDs, because it's a big difference between the enterprise and the non-enterprise or prosumer models of the flash drives. So, for example, we may have some people on the line today that already have systems. They may have a 24D or a 24EX that's supporting this type of a workload. Some XDCAM, ProRes, UHD, doing some promo work, along with ProRes HDs doing long form compressed HD formats. Well, if you want to bring in some color grading, or you want to bring some of that work in house, an SSD 8 is a great way to do it, because it turns your system into a hybrid where the SSDs can handle the very high bandwidth work, leaving alone the other clients on the other server, but still the other server can be taking a copy or an offload of the SSD storage, so that when you bring things in, you can automatically mirror to the hard drives, and then when it comes time to move that job out of the SSD, you simply delete that volume, knowing that the mirror copy exists on the hard drive if you need to restore it later to the SSDs for additional changes and work. Now the SSD 8 compared to a 24D, those 8 little drives are going to perform better than 24 drives spinning disks. And that's just the nature of SSDs, that we are going to get more performance out of those. So it's very impressive what you can do to your network simply by adding one of these SSD boxes online. And it avoids you from having to purchase any more local storage or deal with the pains of local storage, which are all well known, scheduling around your local storage, copying between local storage devices and such. Also, the power of the system here is in the multi-channel ingest, in the audio post mix. It's a very small system. It's a quiet system, outside broadcasting, multi-channels coming into the system at the same time, being very light, being very easy to cool, not having hard drives on board, being more shock-proof. All of those things take effect here with the SSD8, and we think they're going to be very popular in that area. Just having shipped last month in February, we announced the SSD8 shipping. So important to, once you have your 4K work in-house, important to be able to track that. And so we have integrated our fast tracker in with the TerraBlock system for the purpose of managing every type of file, including DPX and EXR and PNG and target files, whether they're in sequence or still image files or not. We can manage all of those and offer you some interesting features along with that. Custom catalogs permissioned by user, the same way a virtual volume is permissioned. You can permission these catalogs. So catalogs can be searched, they can be added to, indexing more data into them, creating additional custom metadata tags so that it's easier to search in the future, either on a file sequence or on individual streaming files. You can tag multiple clips at once. An entire screen of clips can be tagged with the same information so that when you search next time, you'll bring up the clips that you're looking for. And the search itself allows you to refine down with Boolean search terms, access across every catalog or on individual catalogs, or whatever catalogs you have permission to at least read from your user account will be searched every time you enter that in. And it's amazing once you see how quickly the search can complete, because we call it fast tracker for a reason. It's meant to remove all of the delays between you and the media that you need, and once you have the media that you need, allow you to access that directly in your application. Drag and drop into Avid using either AMA or drag and drop transcode to DNX resolutions, drag and drop directly into the Adobe bin or interface, directly into the Final Cut Pro event, and so forth. Now, Fast Tracker comes with 5 seats on every new system that we sell. In fact, we're offering 5 seats free for anyone on a current support contract and running version 6.5 of TerraBlock server. It is server-based. There is no external workstation to worry about here, so it all runs on the server. The database is there, and it's cross-platform. Windows and Mac both have an interface to get into the database, to see all the clips, along with a dedicated player. And that dedicated player is more compatible with many of the formats you use than QuickTime Player. And because of that, it's easy to move the application around, be able to run it on a laptop, be able to run it on a system that doesn't have all the other software and codecs available, and the dedicated player will work with those codecs and formats for you. So please ask anyone there at KeyCode about getting a look at Fast Tracker, and as well as any of the other products that we have. Scalability becomes an important issue when you're talking about 4K. I can live with a single 24D until I start to increase my formats and my jobs and my clients, and it's a good problem to have, to need an expansion of capacity. And that's what the TX16 gives us. Up to 128 terabytes can be accommodated in as little as 3U. And Tier 1 expansion, so that's part of the virtual drive group. You can make new virtual volumes on this expansion as if it were part of the original server. Alternately, we have a Tier 2 nearline, which can be taken off the system, taken off to on-set location, brought back to the facility, hooked in, and shared out immediately with the multi-user write volumes, which is a nice way to have a satellite system come back to the facility and be utilized immediately onto the multi-user write volumes from that point without any additional copying or data movement required. And finally, the ability for you to now upload or synchronize or mirror to cloud locations is done from the server itself. We have integration with all of the cloud services you see through the application we support on the server itself for uploading, and profiles can be created that make it very easy to move data to the cloud and even index cloud locations from Fast Tracker and have that media available for search and view and tagging on the local client systems. Just to finish up here, talking about a couple things that we do very well is our integration with the applications. Now, Adobe Premiere being a great partner of ours in Adobe, we have our own project manager that basically keeps the projects from overwriting each other in the multi-user right shared file system, and that's okay, but Collaboration Hub support is really what everyone's talking about, and that's the ability to share between multiple Adobe projects in real time and be able to send and receive changes on the same timeline you're working on while you're working on that timeline. And we are supporting that in a very unique way. We are on the TerraBlock server itself. So as of NAB or shortly after, we'll be announcing the Collaboration Hub support on TerraBlock server, certain models of TerraBlock server with some upgrades that will be required, but you don't require an external server to provide, or Windows server to provide the Collaboration Hub, and everything works. Fast Tracker, Collaboration Hub, and TerraBlock on the same server chassis and that same 5U chassis to save on rack space, to save on complexity, and to save on the management and administration of that too. Because since the server has access to all its own volumes, the same volumes that are being shared by the clients, you always know you're in sync. You know that you can always get the media that you need and save that project to wherever it needs to be. Of course, our Avid emulation is the best in the market, pure AvidFS across platform, giving you all of the bin locking and project sharing, MXF media files, subdirectory creation, everything that you get with an ISIS or a Unity, including the dynamic media folders and all those new services are available with TerraBlock as well. So we're a great replacement for Unity Fibre Channel, given that we have Fibre Channel support and the workflow doesn't need to change one bit if you don't want it to. Raw qualification, full 4K DPX support in Resolve is always qualified, release upon release. We're constantly looking at Resolve and being sure we have the latest qualifications up to date with that application, as well as with FCPX. And FCPX is interesting in itself because we have the ability to run libraries directly from our shared file system volumes. Does not need to be a local drive. It looks like a network drive to the operating system, but because we're a shared file system and customized protocol, we don't have to worry about it kicking off libraries from our system because we're a network drive. You won't find that with many other network drive systems or NAS environments because Apple simply obscures those from being used in library with library holding. So all the libraries that are held on shared file system volumes, of course, all the renders, the voiceovers, everything you're doing to create media is now on shared storage instead of on your local hard drive. And of course, we support shared media across multiple events and projects as well in this environment. So I'd like to hand it back to Mr. Kamas. I think we could probably go over and see if we have any questions. Starting up with the crowd assembled.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jim. Yeah, we actually have a question thus far. Let me pull that question up. Can you add the SSD 8 as an expansion to the existing server?
The SSD 8 isn't so much an expansion as it is a secondary server, so it is configured as such. But they will work together, of course, and we have methods that make it extremely easy to create volumes on the SSD and mirror those volumes to the hard drive system and vice versa. At first, we had started thinking that everyone was going to start, starting with the SSDs and then move that to the hard drives for protection and simply delete the SSDs when you didn't need that bandwidth anymore. But now, looking at some of the workflows our customers have started with, we're seeing more of the other way around. We're seeing that the high bandwidth and large files, masters, are being placed on the hard drives and then mirrored to the SSDs for a short period of time when it's needed, and then sort of taken off from there. So we have a lot of these hybrid systems, whether it be the SSD8 plus a TX16 or the SSD8 plus an NL16, which is our nearline box. Very cost effective, 70, 80 terabytes worth of raw storage combined at a very reasonable cost, much less than the full 136 or 144 terabyte single enclosure hybrid. And when connected properly, they can really act as one unit, and you can see them both together on the same network.
Looks like we don't have any other questions today. So what you can do following up is with Keycode Media, you can track us down online. You can also track down Facilis online. And of course, we're all over the interwebs on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook at Keycode Media. So Jim, thank you very much for joining, and we invite all of you to contact us if we can talk to you about your storage and workflow needs.
Thanks very much, everybody. Appreciate your time.